Hey people, it's Jim, welcome back to Planet Rewind, and it's time, I haven't done one for a while, just an in-depth discussion on a movie that I've watched, and this is just a critically acclaimed masterpiece as we know, so it's time to once again just delve in, just do an off-the-cuff stream of consciousness on an incredible movie, and it is The Shawshank Redemption from 1994, directed by Frank Darabont, based on the Stephen King novel, obviously stars Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. Now, obviously tells the story of Tim Robbins' character Andy Dufresne, who goes to Shawshank, one of the most, brutal prisons, uncompromising prisons, for being accused of murdering his wife and her lover, which he denies. And he goes there and he meets Morgan Freeman's Red, and it's basically a journey of that friendship developing. We see Andy Dufresne adjusting to life in this horrible prison, and Red just kind of, easing him into it and building that slow friendship. And for me, this is just an absolutely staggering film. I know it's one of the greatest films ever made, and I forgot about Shawshank Redemption, I watched it in the cinema recently, it was showing to get people back in the cinema, one of those films they were showing, and I consider it a real privilege to have seen Shawshank Redemption on the big screen. I think Frank Darabont created a mesmerising work with this. He really did. It's a dizzying experience, The Shawshank Redemption, watching it on the screen, let alone normally. It's, if from watching it on the screen, big screen, this is a cinematic film, isn't it? This is an achievement of cinema, and this needs to be seen on the big screen, and I can see why it blew everyone's minds back in 1994. And for me, what strikes me most in this film, at the core of it, it's a film about hope. It's a film about never giving up in the worst of situations. But there's so much more to it as well. It's a film about the injustice of the prison system, the uncompromising nature of the prison. Obviously, it's changed light years since when this was set. But obviously, it's just about that. It's about, do we throw away prisoners? Should we believe in redemption? Should we believe in rehabilitation, or should we just throw them away and throw away the key and treat them like the scum of the earth? Even if they've done terrible things, shouldn't we be focused on redeeming them? What is the point of prison? I think that's a real theme that comes up in this film. What's the point in these men being there? Are they just thrown away for life? And the intriguing thing about this film is it examines what prison does to you, in that if you're in there for a very, very, very long time, obviously Morgan Freeman's Red, he uses the phrase, he's an institutionalised man, and you hear that, and it's really, an examination of, you go into prison in this film, and, it's this horrible thing and this and that, but eventually, you get used to it, you become institutionalised, and it becomes like a home. And, the guy who's in charge is actually immoral himself. And that's fascinating to me, even at the core of Shawshank's management, even the people upholding this, you'd think, okay, they're giving Bibles out, they're trying to rehabilitate these guys. They're not. They're just trying to keep them in there, throwing these Bibles now and again, but you stay in your station because we're making money off this. Very corrupt, and just, it really seems like a hopeless kind of existence. And I feel like the wonderful thing about the relationship between Red and Andy is Andy comes and he reignites Red's heart, basically. He restores Red's faith in life. He makes Red think again. And just some wonderful conversations between Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. Obviously, the one that we remember is the "Get Busy Living" or "Get Busy Dying" line by Tim Robbins. And I've got to say that Tim Robbins deserves more credit. He's not in much recently, but he's a stunning actor. And this is a fantastic performance because it's so human. It's so, he goes into Shawshank and he's just this stoic, cut-off guy, but the good heart opens up. And it's a really organic way that he builds that relationship with Red. And I think Tim Robbins has such a way in this film of conveying all the conflicted feelings of Andy, but also the hope of Andy that never dies. He's always talking about getting out. He's always trying to make the best of the situation. It's fascinating things that he does in the film to do this. He would do his best to give the prisoners a change of scenery, like when he has them able to have a beer on the roof doing their work. And that scene is presented as this is the pinnacle of existence for these men, and Andy feels a sense of achievement through doing that, and he tries to reopen the prison library, which he does. Morgan Freeman, I don't give him enough credit again as an actor. He has such a way of delivering lines, such a way of facial expressions, such a way with cadence and tone in his speeches, and there's an electric chemistry between Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, because it's so genuine, it's so intriguing, it's so touching, it's so warm, but it's so haunting and uncompromising. Whenever these guys talk, there's an underlying sense of joy and hope, but there's also an underlying sense of horror and terror that things will never change. And it's almost like those two feelings are always fighting each other in Shawshank Redemption. It's like you're trying to hold on to hope, but you remember where you are. And I really think that Frank Darabont presents some uncompromising moments in this. For example, like the first night, where all the prisoners are listening for who's going to go crazy first. Of people who've came in for their first night, and then there's a guy who starts crying and calling for his mother, and the guards beat the living hell out of him, and that's devastating. And it cuts to Red's face, and he's just he's seen it 1,000 times, he's heard it 1,000 times, but he still has horror. It's a horrifying thing, and also the whole thing of getting thrown in the hole whenever you've done something wrong. And Andy gets thrown in this kind of secluded dark room whenever he does something wrong, just to shut him up or something, or this and that, and they leave him in there for 3 months. And it's absolutely bonkers. You think, how could you even hold on to your mind after that? And it's a great film about holding on to yourself, not losing yourself, not losing your mind. And I don't know if I'd be able to do that, and this film really puts you in the thick of it. You're like, how does Andy hold on to this dream of getting out? And I like how the film keeps it ambiguous early on of whether Andy is innocent, because Red has a famous line in this: everyone in Shawshank is innocent. I love that, and he says it throughout. But Andy, as the film goes on, you start to realise, what, he probably is innocent. And it takes a genuine innocent man to go into Shawshank to change Shawshank forever. And it's a paradigm shifter. Andy is. That's what he is. He shifts things up. He shakes things up in this prison. He turns life around. And I love how Red, several times in this film, you see him go in for his review of where he's going to be released, and each time it gets denied. And each time he says, I'm a changed man, this and that, I'm ready to go back to society. Each time it gets denied. And the final time, he does an even longer speech where he says he doesn't care, and he doesn't see the point of prison. He's very, very sorry about what he did. He's not that person anymore, and he just literally lays it out uncompromisingly, and that's what actually gets him his release. And again, I feel like that whole shift of him not just going in and just giving the same speech as normal was brought on by Andy. Andy makes Red rethink life, and I love that. I love how, and Red gives Andy something as well. Red gives Andy that assurance, that friendship, that welcome. Red is the man who can get things in prison, and he does for Andy. He gets him posters, he gets him chess pieces and this and that, and it's all about finding that piece of hope in the dark and not letting the surroundings defeat you, being alive in your own mind. And there's a fantastic line as well where Andy says to Red, "You underestimate yourself." And it really is a film about the ultimate journey of overcoming. It really is. And it's, and again, it's uncompromising. It's dark in places. It's charming in places. It's mesmerising in places. It's classic filmmaking in places. There's so many memorable scenes. I feel like Frank Darabont, the way he moves the camera, he really does create a sense of, at times, tension, at times, terror, horror, of how the prisoners are treated, of what happens with the prisoners. and this and that, but he also has a way of shooting Red and Andy with these close-ups where the actors just show off their acting chops, showing some wonderful inner turmoil, inner thoughts, and this and that. There's some quiet moments in this film. It's not exactly... There are moments, obviously, where things happen, but there's... you're really left to take this film in. It's a very gradually moving film, very... gets under your skin, this film, and the way Frank Darabont does it is very smooth film. It really is. Very smooth pace. And, there's a voiceover by Morgan Freeman as Red, and I think that adds so much to the movie, because he basically starts it off saying, when he first met his friend Andy, and it sets you up for a story of, wow, how did these two guys become friends, and this and that. And Red's kind of comments on what's going on give you that further look into prison life, that further eye. You feel more understanding of the inner workings of the prison, and you relate to Red more because you hear his voiceover. And it's almost the film is pretty much Andy's the main character, but I would say you see the film through the eyes of Red. I would say in a way Red is the main character. You see the film through the eyes of him, and I think that's fascinating because it's, as I say, on the surface Andy's the main character, it follows his story, but he comes into the prison and then we see Andy through Red's eyes. And I think that's wonderful because it's someone who's already lost all hope. He's in prison. He sees this guy come in who completely changes everything. It changes his world. I think that's great. I think Red getting to know Andy along with us is what happens in this film. And, there's many other wonderful performances in the film. William Sadler, Clancy Brown, James Whitmore, and everyone's on top form. There is a devastating scene, obviously, James Whitmore as Brooks, the elderly prison librarian who has been in prison just for as long as he can remotely remember, who gets released in the film. And that's another fantastic scene, because it's an examination of what does happen when these prisoners get released. And you would think it's all sunshine and roses. Yeah, he finally got out of prison, but he doesn't like it. He wants to go back. And there's a voiceover by Brooks as he tries to integrate back into regular life, but he's lonely. He's confused. The world has changed so infinitely since he's been in prison. It's an ultimate example of Red saying, Brooks is an institutionalized man, the same as I am. And it's heartbreaking to see this old man come out into the world and see nothing there. He would rather be in this dark prison. He would rather be there, because prison doesn't necessarily rehabilitate. It just institutionalizes and keeps people stationary. And that's a devastating scene. Melancholy and painful scene. And it blows me away whenever I watch it, and it did in the cinema, Many moments like that. Frank Darabont, he's so great at integrating music into it and hitting the right tones and marks when he brings in his music cues and his shots and this and that. He hits you right at the right moment to pull at your heartstrings or to bring about an emotional reaction. It's a film that translates so well. It's such a human film with a wonderful, charming, effective and positive message ultimately at the end of the film. So if you haven't seen Shawshank and you avoid it because you don't want to see lots of people miserable in prison, it's very much, even the moments in prison, there are some moments of pure joy and happiness. You're watching this and there are so many years that Red and Andy spend in this prison. You would just think that you would just, again, as Red says, you give yourself to the prison, you give up. But Andy never gives up. Years and years and years he never gives up. The power of consistency, the power of knowing that he's eventually going to not let this place beat him. He's eventually going to get out. He's eventually going to get the prison library. He's eventually going to do this. That sense of scope to a worldview is phenomenal. To hold on to that sense of seeing the future and not giving up on that dream is incredible. And it's a real tough message, this film. It encourages us to think beyond our general abilities as human beings. I think what Andy achieves in this is unbelievable, and you think of real prisoners in real life. I don't know how accurate this is, but maybe there was a prisoner who was released, who was innocent, who went on American Idol, recently and has done really well, and he was there for 20 years and this and that. The power of believing in yourself in the midst of just no hope left, I think is wonderful, and I think that's the idea of this film. Wonderful performances, wonderful dialogue, wonderfully written. I love this film, guys. I really, really love Shawshank Redemption. That was just a stream of consciousness on the movie. I've done other in-depth analysis. Click on them on the screen now. But thanks for listening, guys. Please comment down below. Let's have a chat about Shawshank Redemption, one of the greatest films of all time, and I will see you guys next time.